It was just another day at Ridgewood High when a group of students found themselves the target of some officers stationed on campus. Among them was Marcus, a quiet, hard-working black teen who kept to himself. But to these officers, he was nothing more than an easy target. They joked, laughed, and made comments about his clothes, his sneakers, and even his backpack, anything they could find to poke fun at. Marcus tried to brush it off, but you could see the tension in his face, the way his fists clenched under the table. What none of them knew, though, was that Marcus wasn't just any kid. His dad had just been promoted. He was now their new boss. And tomorrow morning, these same officers would have to face him at their precinct. Little did they realize their actions today would come back to haunt them in a way they never expected. Marcus had learned to stay quiet when situations like this happened. It wasn't the first time he'd been singled out, and he figured it wouldn't be the last. He kept his head down, gripping his pencil tightly as the officers chuckled among themselves, unaware of the weight of their actions. What they didn't see was the determination in Marcus's eyes. He had spent years learning how to handle these moments, but today felt different. At home, Marcus's father, Detective James Carter, had just wrapped up his first week in his new role as chief of police. Known for his no-nonsense approach and strong sense of justice, Chief Carter had worked hard to earn his position. He had warned Marcus about the challenges he might face as the son of someone in law enforcement, but he hadn't expected this. What would happen when James learned that his officers were humiliating his own son? Later that evening, Marcus sat at the dinner table, quieter than usual. His dad noticed immediately. "Rough day at school?" James asked, his tone calm but curious. Marcus hesitated, debating whether to share what had happened. He didn't want to stir up trouble, but he also couldn't shake the humiliation he felt. "It's nothing, Dad," Marcus muttered, poking at his food. James studied him for a moment, recognizing the look on his son's face, one he'd seen many times in the mirror when he was younger. Meanwhile, back at the precinct, the officers from Ridgewood High were talking about the day, laughing over their so-called jokes with no idea of the storm brewing. One of them even mentioned how the new chief was starting tomorrow, but none of them thought twice about it. To them, it was just another night. Marcus finally broke his silence. "Dad, if I tell you something, promise you won't overreact." James leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. "You know you can tell me anything, Marcus. What happened?" Marcus hesitated, glancing at his dad's badge sitting on the kitchen counter. "It's just some officers at school. They've been giving me a hard time." "Nothing serious," Marcus said, trying to downplay it. But James wasn't buying it. "What kind of hard time?" he pressed, his expression growing more serious. Marcus finally let it out, explaining how the officers had mocked him, the comments they made, and how powerless it had made him feel. James listened silently, but his jaw tightened with every word. He recognized the officers' behavior for what it was: abuse of power. The fact that it had happened to his son made it personal. The next morning, James arrived at the precinct earlier than usual. As he walked through the halls, his presence commanding attention, the officers from Ridgewood High froze. They locked eyes with him, their casual smirks fading as realization set in. They didn't need an introduction to know who he was. The room fell silent as James stood in the doorway, his gaze sharp and unwavering. The officers exchanged nervous glances, trying to gauge how much he knew. James didn't say a word at first. He simply walked past them, his steps deliberate, the sound of his shoes echoing in the tension-filled room. But just as he reached his office, he turned and looked directly at the officers from Ridgewood High. "I'll be seeing you in my office after roll call," he said, his tone calm, but laced with authority. Their faces went pale. What they didn't realize was that Marcus had recorded their comments on his phone. The night before, after Marcus finally opened up, James had listened to the playback in disbelief. Now, armed with undeniable proof, James was determined to address the issue head-on. But just as he was preparing for the meeting, a call came in. It was from the school principal, reporting another incident involving the same officers. This time, it wasn't just words. James tightened his grip on the phone, knowing the situation had just escalated in a way no one could ignore. James hung up the phone, his jaw clenched. The principal's voice still echoed in his mind. Your son wasn't the only one they targeted. A teacher stepped in this morning, and things got out of hand. There's footage. The revelation hit him like a brick. This wasn't just a case of officers overstepping. They were creating a pattern of abuse that could no longer be brushed aside. And now, it wasn't just his son's word. There were witnesses, evidence, and a rapidly growing spotlight on the situation. Meanwhile, back at the precinct, the officers had started piecing things together. Do you think he knows? One of them whispered, panic creeping into his voice. Another shook his head, trying to stay calm. There's no way. Even if he does, we just apologize, and it's over. But as they sat in the chief's office waiting for him, they noticed a stack of files on his desk, the top one marked with their names. Then the door opened, and James walked in with a laptop under his arm. Without saying a word, he pressed play on a video, the security footage from that morning at the school. The tension in the room was suffocating as the truth began to unravel in front of them. But just as James paused the video and opened his mouth to speak, his phone buzzed with a new call. The look on his face darkened as he answered. "This is Chief Carter." The voice on the other end was calm but urgent. "Chief, there's someone from the district office here to talk to you. It's about those officers." James' eyes narrowed. The situation was spiraling faster than anyone could have expected. James's hands shook as he processed the betrayal, but his resolve only grew stronger. He wasn't going to let this corrupt web of lies ruin everything he had worked for. He turned to Officer Malone. "You've made your choice, but you've underestimated me." Malone's face fell, realizing James wasn't going to back down. With a swift decision, James contacted the higher-ups at the department and exposed everything: the cover-up, the harassment, the scheme to take him down. The truth, now undeniable, shook the entire precinct to its core. In the following days, the officers responsible were placed under investigation, and James's position as chief was solidified. As for Marcus, he found a new sense of strength, no longer afraid to stand up for what was right. The bond between father and son grew stronger, and the community began to see the real face of leadership, one built on integrity, justice, and the courage to fight for what's right.